Is a paid program. Advice and opinions expressed during the program are solely that of Jung's Garden Center, not WBEV or Good Karma Brands. Let's join Thomas Reifold and the Garden Doctor.
Well, thank you so much, LA, and good morning to you. Joined today with the Garden Doctor, as always, Dick Zondag. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
We have a lot to discuss. Looking outside, we have some inclement weather, and you mentioned last week that we could start planting onions and potatoes in our gardens, and we could probably start right there. We might have to wait a couple more days for this to drain through.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to do it today, but I planted onions. I planted some 2 weeks ago. I planted some last week, and they're doing just fine. Even with the snow on top of them, they'll take down to 20 degrees very easily. And the quicker you get them in now, the better they'll be, because you want to get as much vegetative growth on onions as you can before the days get too long. So, the time to get this stuff in as soon as it dries out a little bit. You don't want to work the soil when it's so wet. And I guess a determining factor is that you take a handful of soil, you make a ball out of it, and you push down on it with your thumb. If it breaks apart, then it's okay to start working the soil. If it stays in a ball and it's kind of mushy, just go have a beer or go watch some TV
That's some
or
pretty
something.
excellent advice from the Garden Doctor. I was talking to my dad about that yesterday, because farmers are pretty wary about plowing the field when it is so wet like this and create that film, because then the roots will never get into the ground.
You ruin the texture of the soil for the whole season, and then it takes another year of freezing and thawing to get it back into good shape. And that depends too on the amount of organic matter you have and the type of soil that you have too. I mean, the sandier the soil, the easier it is to work after it rains pretty hard. If you've got clay, it takes a lot longer for the soil to dry out. But if you've got clay, there's things that you can do with it to amend the soil. And even when you've got a good silt soil or sandy soil, you should be adding organic matter to your soil every year, because the organic matter is where the nutrients are held, and it makes the texture of the soil much easier to work, and the plants love it a lot better. And so, even in raised bed gardens, the soil is almost all organic matter, and plants just thrive in it. And these baskets that I have here,
These are some beautiful flowers you have here. The scent is quite relaxing. What are the varieties that you have here in these baskets?
well, there's some petunias. I'm not sure what the varieties are. They're vegetatively propagated. They're not ones that you do from seed. You have to propagate them from cuttings. But people that are developing these new flowers are really making leaps and bounds as far as different things and different colors and different textures. The petunias with the speckles are just magnificent, and when you add a few other things to the basket and you get things trailing, once they start to grow, they'll be beautiful in your hanging from your front porch for months. So, yeah, our greenhouse is starting to look pretty spectacular right now, and the people out there are doing a great job of getting things going.
Well, you mentioned using that peat moss, and when I went to Jung's a couple weeks ago, I picked up that bag that you recommend for starting seeds, the natural and organic peat moss blend.
Right.
Well, I have an update on the tomato seeds.
Okay.
Because I think your recommendation really helped out a lot. I was really burying my seeds too deeply, so I
Okay.
got the sieve, and I sieved some of that peat moss on top. And it took a while. I actually planted them last Wednesday, and on Sunday I wasn't seeing any activity, but it was kind of cold. And so I got a little extra warmth, and I'm starting to get sprouts. I'm
Right.
getting tomato sprouts, Dick. I'm
Yep.
so excited about this.
Yeah, it takes, under optimum conditions, you can see tomatoes sprout in 4 or 5 days. And that's where you keep the soil warm, at 55 to 65 degrees. And that isn't the air temperature, because the soil temperature is much different than the air temperature. Even if your air temperature is at 68 or 70 degrees, your soil temperature is still probably in the 50s. And so by putting them on some heat mats or putting them in an area where you've got extra heat on top of a fluorescent light, or, where I hate this, I don't think putting them in front of a heat vent is a good, with the forced air, because that'll tend to dry the stuff out unless you've got it in a plastic bag. But that soil, the bottom heat is really a difference maker. I mean, people
Yeah.
that have those heat mats and start their seeds with the heat mats, they just, I guess I have had personal experience when I first started growing seedlings back in the 70s when I came back from graduate school. We were starting seeds in the greenhouse, and you'd spread the petunias or whatever seeds you had on the flats and put them in the greenhouse on the sand benches, and without the bottom heat, they'd come up sporadically. And the next year we got some heating mats and put them underneath. We found out that we were sowing the seeds probably 4 or 5 times heavier than we had to, and the seeds were coming up so sporadically, where when you've got bottom heat, the seeds just pop out of the ground. It really is a big difference if you've ever, and especially with the harder and the smaller seeds, if you don't use bottom heat, you're probably going to have a lot of problems. Tomatoes, cabbage, those sorts of things, you can get away without the bottom heat, but they're going to be slower starting and less uniform. With the bottom heat, they just kind of pop out of the ground.
And that's what I noticed. I noticed that I had cold floors, was not getting enough heat, and sure enough, when heat was added, that's when the difference happened. And you have a selection of heat mats at Jung's. What else do you recommend to kind of increase that ambient floor temperature where seedlings might be?
Yeah, the heat mats are probably the easiest things, or like I said, if you put it on top of a fluorescent light where you're getting heat from the ballasts, or some top of a refrigerator where you're getting heat from the coils. Anything you can do to heat that soil up, because the air temperature, although it keeps the soil warmer than if they were in a cold, area, that there's not enough heat to do a good job. So, bottom heat.
Bottom heat is important, and not having too much fertility in your soil. And you mentioned this the last time that I tried planting them, I was getting so much mold growth, and you said, what are you adding to your soil? And I mentioned worm castings and calcium. What does that mean, though, exactly, of too much fertility in the soil? Is that an issue?
Well, most fertility are salts. And see, sorry, I'm coming back from a cold.
Oh, no problem.
What happens is you water the soil, and those things are salts. And what happens is when the water evaporates, then you get sort of a dusting on top of the soil. And that's what you were seeing. It wasn't fungus. It was a layer of salt.
It was salt. So it was salt rising to the surface of the individual pods then?
Right.
Oh, okay. So, and again, you just said that all you need to start seeds is the peat moss blend, and that's fine.
Yep.
If you have a question for the garden doctor, Dick Zondag, now's the time, 885-4446. You can also give us a text as well if you are occupied, 887-9595. Yesterday was cutting some seed potatoes, getting ready to plant those. How long do you recommend that they stay out in scab before we plant them?
Okay, what you usually do with them is when you cut them, you dust them with lime or something like that, and and then you let them sit out for probably 3 or 4 days or a week. What the potato does then is it forms a callus tissue over that cut surface. So if we get rain and cold weather like we've got now, that piece of potato, if you just throw it in the ground, starts rotting immediately, because the soil microorganisms will start attaching to the carbohydrates that are in that potato, and will start rotting it right away. So cut the potatoes up. A lot of people, especially if the potatoes are smaller, will plant the whole potato. They won't even cut it. But most of the potatoes are larger and should have at least 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces weight for each of the eyes that you have. And so cutting them up gives you more potato plants, putting them in the ground. If you've got large potatoes and you put the whole thing in the ground in one piece, you get too many stems coming out of the ground. So if they're large potatoes, it's better to cut them up.
Well, we got a couple of calls coming through for the garden doctor. Let's go to the phones and say good morning. What's your question?
Morning, Dick.
Good morning.
I got one question. Is there anything that I can use my coffee grounds for in the garden?
Yeah, you can either add them to the compost pile, or you can actually use them as a mulch. Just put them at the base of the plant, and but I think probably running them through the compost bin probably the best thing to do with them, because that'll acidify the compost and make it work better. But yeah, coffee
Okay.
grounds are excellent to add to the garden.
Somebody told me once that I could just put them around my tomato plants to keep the slugs off. Is there any truth in that?
I'm not sure. Could keep them off. Slugs are a problem in dark, wet places, and my my solution for slugs is taking a small pie plate and making an indentation in the soil so that the plate is kind of level with the soil, and then put some beer in the pie plate. And what happens is the yeast that they use to make the beer attracts the slugs, and the slugs will go in and they start swimming, they get drunk, and they drown.
Oh.
And they go out happy, and you go out happy. Like I tell people, sometimes I have a hard time making it from the kitchen to the garden and having beer left in the can. But that's the best way to, if you've got a slug problem, is to put some plates in the ground and put some beer in them, and you'll have slugs in the beer.
I can't work any of them coffee grounds right into the soil right away, could I, or no?
You can. What I would do then is add a little bit of fertilizer, so that the microorganisms that'll attack those coffee grounds will have some extra nutrients to work with.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you for calling.
Thank you for the question. I believe we have another caller on the line. Let's go right there and say good morning. What's your question for Dick Zonde?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I have, oh, by the way, I like your slug solution. I have a tropical hibiscus that I've had for quite a few years.
Okay.
And it will not blossom in the summer outside, but when I take it in the house in the fall, like December, January, it starts to blossom. How can I make it blossom in the summer?
Okay. Are you putting it in the sunlight?
Outside?
Yes.
Probably partial sun.
Yeah. The more sunlight you can give hibiscus, the better they like it. And what you'll find too is with with any plants that you go from inside to outside, a lot of the leaves will drop off, and people think the plant is dead, but it's actually the leaves that are differentiated outside have a different structure to them, I guess you'd say, than the ones that are initiated indoors, and so they sometimes won't survive, and they drop off, and then the plant grows again outside, and away it goes. But give it some fertilizer, not something that has a lot of nitrogen in it. The first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the third number is potassium.
Okay.
The second and third number should be a little bit bigger than the first number. So we have a fertilizer in the garden center called Rooting and Blooming, which is perfect for plants that flower outside. And you just
Okay.
put it in the water, and you water them with that, and they'll start to bloom real nicely for you.
Do I need to kind of wean them slowly into full sunlight?
No,
I can
no,
put them right out.
just put them right out where they get,
Okay.
the sunlight.
Okay. And my second question is due to amaryllis.
Okay.
I took very poor care of my amaryllis in the summertime when they're outside.
Okay.
Did not fertilize like I should. Therefore, they did not blossom. is there a chance that I can still put them back out, fertilize them, that they will blossom again?
Yes, and the most important fertilizer that is in August and September. That's when you want to fertilize them the most, because
Okay.
that's when they're forming the flower buds inside the bulb for the next, for flowering the next spring. Because the
Okay.
bulbs that we sell in, in late fall and winter, the flowers are already inside the bulb, and it's because they know exactly when to fertilize those bulbs.
Okay, thanks
Okay.
much.
Thank you so much for the question. Dick, I have some follow-up questions about using coffee grounds as mulch, but we did have a text come through. Jim was wondering, he knows it's a little early in the season, but he wants to attract some hummingbirds in his yard. What flowers should he be considering planting this year?
Okay, Monarda is an excellent one for,
Minarda?
Monarda, yeah, is an excellent one for hummingbirds. Boy, Google is unbelievable for this kind of information,
So even the doctor
the
uses Google.
Penstemon is,
Penstemon?
yeah, Penstemon is another one. The feeders really work well, where you get the sugars that, and some people use regular cane sugar, but there are the sugars that are inside the flowers that hummingbirds go after is different than the ones that come in a bag, as the sugar cane sugar. And so those are the ones that really attract the hummingbirds. And so sometimes it has a little bit of a reddish dye in it, but you also hear that it's better not to have that dye in there, but the red color kind of catches the hummingbird's eyes. So once you get them coming, they come all summer long.
So you want a hetero mix of flowers to offer different types of sugars to hummingbirds?
Yeah, I mean, the more, there's a lot of perennials. Phlox is another one that, garden phlox is really, really attractive. I remember not the first time I ever saw hummingbirds, but we had a field full of garden phlox. We had a lot of them left over, and so we planted them on our west farm, and it was unbelievable how many phlox. We were out there at sort of sunset one evening, my dad and I think my mom and some of the other kids in our family, and the field was just full of hummingbirds. They looked like big bumblebees kind of buzzing from flower to flower. It was quite a scene.
The following is a paid program. The views and opinions expressed are solely that of Jung's Garden Center, not WBEV, ESPN, nor Good Karma Brands. If you have a question for Dick Zondag, the Garden Doctor, our text line is open, 887-9595. You can also call 885-4446. Dick, using coffee grounds or any sort of byproducts we may have in the kitchen as mulch, is there anything we have to maybe be mindful of?
Yes, you don't want to use any animal products like any fats or things like that, either in a compost pile or as mulches, because it attracts rodents and it doesn't decompose very easily. Though that stuff should go in the garden. I think a good rule of thumb is to know if it was alive at one time or another, as far as a vegetative plant growing. If it was, that's probably going to work as a good mulch. I mean, things like ground corn cobs or rice hulls or grass clippings, hay or straw, anything like that works very good as a mulch. Thing you got to remember, though, is you don't want to mulch too early in the garden. I would say mid-June is when you should start mulching, because what a mulch does is it tends to make things stay the way they are below the mulch. So, mulching your perennials in the fall, if they're newly planted, you want to mulch them early because that keeps the soil warmer for a longer period of time. But if you've got an established perennial, you want to mulch it around Thanksgiving, because by then the soil is cold and the mulch will prevent the freezing and thawing that you get in the wintertime, because that's the most difficult thing for a perennial, is if the soil is freezing and thawing all the time. So that's why I use a mulch on established perennials, because that way when you get the the warming winds in late January, February, which we usually get, that keeps the soil underneath the mulch, underneath the hay or straw, cold, so that you're not getting the heat, the soil warming up, and the plants thinking that it's time to grow. Kind of like with the lawns. I mean, now is the time. Lawns are basically things that grow in the spring and in the fall, and you can see now the grass is starting to green up even with these cold rains. And so now is the time that if you're going to fertilize the lawn, now is the best time to do it. And I guess on the way in, I've seen some of the forsythia that I usually use as the signal for applying crabgrass preventer. Crabgrass preventer is a germination inhibitor. Crabgrass comes from seed every year. So the seed starts in the springtime, it grows, makes your lawn look terrible because it kind of spreads instead of growing like bluegrass. And then in the fall, it drops its seeds, and so you've got seeds there. But when you put the crabgrass preventer on, it's a germination inhibitor, so it keeps the crabgrass from germinating, or if it does start to germinate, it kills it before it can, before the roots get in the ground. So you have to have it on before the seed starts to germinate, but you have to have it on, you don't want to get it on earlier than when the seeds start to germinate. And they start to germinate about the same time that the forsythia starts to bloom. And so I've seen, like I said, I've seen some of the forsythia in the area blooming, and so now's the time to get it on.
We got some calls coming through for the Garden Doctor. If you have a question as well, 885-4446. Let's go to the phone. Say good morning. What is your question?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a raised garden bed.
Okay.
And I've had, for the soil, I've used a filtered organic soil from
Okay.
a marsh base
Okay.
around Oregon. It's been about 3 year, and last year I added some of the product you have in your store.
Right?
I think it's called a Purple Cow
Yep.
Organic Matter.
Yep. Purple Cow Organics. Yep.
And do I need to add that each year, or do I need to add something different this year, or just let it go for a season?
No, I think it's good to add some each spring, because what happens is as the vegetables or whatever you've got in your raised bed garden are growing, they're taking nutrients out of the soil that's there, and so the nutrients start to get depleted if you don't add some compost to them each year. So each year I add a layer of compost to my raised bed gardens, and I kind of work it in the top couple of inches because, I don't want to rework the soil completely, but putting some new compost on top gives the plants some nutrients to work with.
Okay. So should I use the Purple Cow?
Purple
once
Cow
again,
is an
or leaf
excellent
compost?
one.
Okay.
But you can use anything. I mean, if you've got some well-rotted manure from a farmer that you know, that works really well. Any kind of, well-rotted compost works fine.
Okay. That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yep,
Appreciate
thanks
it.
for calling.
Thank you for the question. Let's go back to the other line and say good morning. What is your question for the Garden Doctor?
Good morning. I have, I call them crop circles in my lawn, which I'm told is fungus.
Yep.
Is this too early to treat them?
What you're going to find with most of the circles is that there's something buried underground that's maybe a piece of wood or something that's rotting, and that's giving off the fungus, and it's very difficult to cure those fairy rings unless you get rid of that wood. And so if it's not too extensive, what you can do is lift the sod and set it aside and then dig down and see what's there causing that that circle, and then remove that and then put the sod back in and fertilize the lawn, and it'll be just fine.
The problem is it's not just in one area. It's spreading to different spots throughout my lawn.
Do you have a new home?
No.
No, okay. Because lots of times what'll happen is the carpenters will bury all the wood scraps that they had when they were building your house, and those wood scraps start to decompose, and that's the source of food for those fairy rings.
I have 3 acres of lawn, and it's way in the back,
Oh,
not
wow.
really near the house at all. And this, it just started about 3-4 years ago.
You know,
And it's been like 30 years since we've lived here.
yeah, so what I would do is maybe aerate the lawn. I mean, you can rent aerators from most rental stores, or, most of the lawn services will aerate lawns. And what they do is they take a plug of soil out of the lawn and then fertilize it, and that will revitalize the lawn also.
Okay. Is it also helpful to put in an antifungal?
Yeah, I mean, that helps. It's usually pretty expensive for large areas, though.
Okay. So it's kind of a wet area. Would that be
And see, that's
contributing to it?
contributing also because funguses love warm, warm, wet areas.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And thank you for calling.
Thank you so much for the question. 885-4446 if you have a question for Dick Zondag, the garden doctor. And going back to the subject, we could probably talk every single show about compost and mulch because they're so invaluable to how you garden and how we can keep our flowers and vegetables
Yeah, and
healthy.
see, we're doing videos like crazy now on Jung Seed site. It says the garden doctor, there's a place you can click on, or you can go to YouTube. I have my own channel called the Garden Doctor channel, and I'm doing videos on raised bed gardens, on planting strawberries, asparagus, all sorts of things. We're going to be doing a lot of them over the next year or two. Maybe I won't even have to come in for the Garden Doctor show, I don't know. But anyway, if you've got if you want just a general informational video on how to build a raised bed gardens or what soil to use in a raised bed gardens, we're doing all kinds of videos and things. So, even when I'm not on the not on the airwaves like I am in the spring and in the fall, those videos will, and there are a lot of videos on YouTube too that are gardening related, and so.
Well, I hope you'll stay with us. If
Yeah.
you need a little bit of a motivator, we can always bring some more beer because that seems
Yeah.
to be a pretty
Yeah.
invaluable tool in the garden.
Yeah,
But I did see something about being careful of using wood chips when you're mulching around vegetables because of nitrogen lockup. Is that a serious issue?
That is an issue because what happens is the microorganisms that do the decomposition in the soil will attack that wood, and they soak up the nitrogen to grow and to multiply. And when microorganisms and plants are fighting for the same nutrients, the microorganisms win out and the plants starve. So if you're putting wood in the garden, and I do use wood chips sometimes for mulch, you should be putting some extra fertilizer there so the plants and the wood both have the fertility that they need. I mean, I put a 6-inch layer of wood chips over my asparagus garden last fall because I had a lot of weeds in there. Now the quackgrass is starting to come up, and I'm going to hit that with an herbicide to try to kill that before the asparagus comes up. But if you're putting wood chips on, you've got to add extra fertility to the area so that the nitrogen isn't all used up by the microorganisms that are decomposing those wood chips.
So going back to the fairy rings, when the fungus is eating the wood under the ground,
Right.
is that it's sucking all that nitrogen so then the grass isn't getting it? And
Well,
that's why it's
what's
dying?
happening is the fairy rings themselves are the fruiting bodies of the fungus. And so the things that you see above ground are actually the culmination of what's happening underground. The wood is rotting, and the fungus wants to multiply, and so it sends up these mushrooms. I mean, mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of funguses, and so that's what's happening in that, I think, happening in that lawn. Because as she said, it was a wet area. Well, wet and fungus growth are synonymous. I mean, and that's, in diseases too. But diseases are funguses, and where you have an area where the dew doesn't dry off in the morning until noon, those fungus spores are germinating, and if you were drying off like at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, the germ tube is coming out of the spore, and if it dries up, that kills that spore because there's nothing in the spore to give that energy to wait until the next day. And so, if you're having trouble, if you've got plants like the phlox or the monarda or things like that that are very susceptible to fungal diseases, powdery mildew is a fungal disease, you want to keep it in the morning sun because then the dew dries off. You plant them farther apart so you get good air circulation. Roses should be planted where they get morning sun because if they don't, they get trouble with black spot, and black spot is a fungus. And so by planting the plants that are most susceptible to these leaf diseases, if you plant them in a sunny area so they get morning sun, you're going to have less problems. It's like with years too. When we have a very dry year, we sell very few fungicides because there's not a lot of disease. Where the years that we have a wet spring or it's wet throughout the year, we sell tons of fungicide because that's when the diseases can really spread. The years that it's dry and we don't sell fungicides, we sell a lot of insecticides because the insects like to have hot, dry, some of them like to have hot, dry weather conditions, and so that's when, you need insecticides.
So that's a pretty strong argument for targeted watering as well. Then
Exactly. I mean, when you're watering, you don't want to water through the plants if possible. You want to water so that the water is reaching the ground and not on the plants. And it's also why you want to train tomatoes up on some kind of a trellis or some kind of a fencing and keeping the bottom leaves and things off, because when you get rain, it splashes the soil up into the tomatoes, and if they're all laying on the ground, it's splashing it onto all the leaves, and that's when you get early blight. So we're going to be planting a lot of tomatoes on fences this year to doing a lot of trialing of different varieties of tomatoes. So.
Well, you mentioned all the great videos you have on YouTube. There's a couple of that I want to mention on the Garden Doctor channel. But before that, let's go back to the phones and say good morning. What's your question for the Garden Doctor?
Hi, I've got a couple of large brown spots on my lawn, and I was just wondering if there's a type of grass seed that can grow in that kind of stuff or not.
Do you have a female dog?
No, male.
Okay, a male dog. The spots in the lawn are usually because a dog or something has urinated in that spot and it kills the grass. And so what
Is
you
there
want
anything you
what you want to do is you want to take a hose and water it down really, really well so you leach the urine out of the nitrogen that's in the urine out of the area, and then you can seed the grass again.
Okay,
So
that sounds good. Okay, I'll try that.
yep.
So that's just
Thank
a
you.
simple case. Thank you for that question of nitrogen burn then.
Yeah, that's a simple case where the salts in the urine are so high that it dehydrates the root system, and the plants die. So the solution is to get the nitrogen out of the soil profile by leaching it out with water, and then there are, for spot areas, there are some really neat seeds that we sell that are embedded into a sort of a papery substance. They look like pellets, and you just put them on the ground and water them, and that papery substance makes a nice mulch so that the grass seed doesn't dry out when it gets, when it starts to germinate.
Still have a little time left if you have a question for the Garden Doctor, 885-4446. But you mentioned paper right there, and seed tape was a question that we left off last episode. It's a video you have on your YouTube channel. What exactly is seed tape?
Seed tape is where they embed the seed into a papery substance. It's almost like toilet paper, and what you do is you just dig a very shallow furrow, especially with carrots and beets and things like that, and you put the tape on the ground, you put a little bit of soil on top of it, and you water it in, and the seed comes up very uniformly. It's embedded into the paper so that you have to do very little thinning, where if you're planting seed, raw seed, it's a hard time getting the right spacing, and so you plant more seed than you need, and so you have to thin it out so that your carrots have room to grow. But it's a great system. There are people that I've talked to that will never go back to planting raw carrot seed. They use seed tapes because they work so well. And with my raised bed gardens, I plant the seed tapes about 3 inches apart so that you've got a lot of rows of carrots. And I guess the 1 year that I remember, we had a 4x4 raised bed garden with about 10 or 12 inches of compost in it, and I put the rows about 3 inches apart, and we had almost 2 bushels of carrots out of that 4x4 area because there were so many carrots in there, and they were just beautiful. I mean, carrots should be raised in a raised bed garden because they they have that organic soil that they can grow and expand, and they're really beautiful. I wouldn't plant them in anything else right now.
What other plants would you almost always plant now in a raised bed over into the soil?
Well, I've had good luck with most of the vegetables, but if you're going to put a trellis near our fence, peas. I mean, you can plant peas right now. They'll handle the cold weather. The things that I don't put in a raised bed garden are things like sweet corn because they take up too much space. A raised bed garden is for vegetables that you can crowd. I think even tomatoes, it's kind of a waste of space to put them in a raised bed unless you're doing everything in a raised bed situation, because you got to train them up. They would take up too much of the space. So, it's kind of fun trying different things and seeing how they do.
That is quite a bit of the fun, but I'm experimenting now, really getting into gardening for the first real time in my life. But there was one YouTube short that you had that maybe tempered my ambitions. It was starting small. Mm-hmm. And why is that important if somebody's starting a garden for the first time to just start
especially
small?
if you're starting in the soil. Starting small, because if you try to do too much the first year, especially if you're working grass under or starting with something that had a sod in it, you're going to have weeds like crazy. And so the more space you have, the more weeds you're going to have to take care of, and it's going to become more of a occupation than a hobby. And you get sick of doing the weeding, and you just let it go, and then the vegetables kind of disappear too. So starting small, using things like mulch, weeding the garden before the weeds get large, keeping a good notebook on what things you use, what things worked well and what things didn't. If a certain vegetable variety didn't work well, try a different one. If every bean would work well on the soil that you've got, we'd only have one bean in the catalog, and we have a catalog with probably 50 or 60 different varieties of beans in it. So, different vegetable varieties perform differently in different types of soils and climates, and so just kind of experiment. And if you find something that works really, really well, keep track of that, because that's what you should use every year then.
Well, I think we have time for one quick question if we have the caller on for about a minute or so. Caller, what's your question for the garden doctor?
Okay, my question is it too early to be putting crabgrass preventer on? I know we had that weather last week, but...
No, as I said, we talked about that a little bit. The forsythia is blooming, so now is the time to get it on. It may be just a hair bit early with this cold weather that we've had, but you've got to have it on before the seeds germinate, or it doesn't work.
All right. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Dick.
Thank you for that question. Dick, 7 locations, Jung's Garden Center, greenhouse updates, bare root room.
Yeah, the bare root rooms are open, and we have bare roots in all of the garden centers except Stoughton. And then the first year we've had Stoughton open, and so we're not having bare root in there. But you know, the 3 Madison stores, Stevens Point, Appleton, Randolph, all have bare root, and store hours in Randolph are 9 to 5 Monday through Saturday, not open on Sunday in Randolph. The stores, the other stores are 10 to 6 Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturday, and 10 to 3 on Sunday in the other stores.
Well, Dick, thank you for another enlightening episode of The Garden Doctor and realizing how important beer is for the work of a gardener.
Yeah.
I really appreciate
I
that.
should have had one here to keep my voice from crackling.
Well, we'll work on that next week. The following was a paid program. The views and opinions expressed solely that of Jung's Garden Center, not WBEV, ESPN, or Good Karma Brands. That will do it for today's Garden Doctor.